Hi, this is Meg from Fangirling Through Fiction and welcome to my first video review. Today we're going to be going through two books, The Windup Girl by Paolo Bacigalupi and Cinder by Marissa Meyer. This isn't the actual cover of Cinder, I've got my hands on a reading copy here, but I will be putting the cover up on screen for you. There's three reasons why we're doing two books today. The first is because I haven't posted a review in an age. The second is because I'm trying out this newfangled video thing. And the third is because these books are actually quite similar, but they differ in important ways, which I think is interesting to discuss. But first, let's look at them individually. Bacigalupi's Windup Girl is a dark work of speculative fiction set when the world has run out of oil and so-called calorie companies peddling genetically modified foods have the world in a stranglehold. You see, in this future, natural food has mostly died out due to various plagues and diseases, so the calorie companies gene-hack their crops, both in order to stay ahead of the latest iteration of plague, and also to make the crops sterile so farmers have to continually buy the seeds from the companies. Naturally, having control over the world's food supply has given the calorie companies obscene amounts of power, and, like all good evil corporations, they use their power not to help feed the starving population, but to see how much money they can extort out of dying people.
Gentlemen, in exactly 5 days, we will be $100 billion richer.
Guess who's going to be winning People's Choice for Company of the Year? Anyway, so the calorie companies have taken over everywhere except the Kingdom of Thailand, which is where our story is set. The Windup Girl follows several different characters who each have their own intertwining stories, all of which ultimately weave into the ongoing tale of Thailand's struggle to keep the calorie companies out. The titular character, Emiko, is a Windup Girl, or New People as she calls herself. She is a Japanese creation, bred from a mixture of genes to create whatever was required. In Emiko's case, she was bred as a part-time translator and part-time bedroom slave, which has to lead to some very interesting job interview questions. So, it says here that you used to perform unspeakable acts for your last master.
Only unspeakable in English. I can tell you in Japanese if you want. They have a word for it over there.
Regardless, Emiko was discarded by her last master and has ended up in a dive bar as the entertainment.
Prepare her for our pleasure!
The Windup Girl is dark and full of morally questionable people trying to survive in a broken world. It won a whole bunch of awards when it first came out, and deservedly so. By contrast, Cinder is a new novel by Marissa Meyer that is a retelling of the Cinderella story, except that we're in the future. Cinderella is a cyborg in New Beijing, and there are mind-controlling aliens from the moon set to take over the world. It's that kind of book. So let's back this up so we can see if at any point this starts to make sense. Cinder is a cyborg living in New Beijing. She works as a mechanic and has an evil stepmother who resents her and views her as subhuman. She also has two stepsisters, one of whom is as nasty as her mother, and the other who is actually a decent human being. One day, Prince Kai, not that one, having heard that Cinder is the best mechanic in the city, he asks her to fix his android. Cinder agrees, and the plot unfolds from there. There's a ball, there's a plague of unknown origins, there's mind-controlling space aliens. The usual stuff, really. Cinder actually surprised me. When I was given the synopsis, I wasn't expecting that much. Maybe a fun romp, but nothing too engaging or special. But I was dead wrong. Cinder is surprisingly good. Yes, there's the silliness of the plot synopsis, but Meyer makes it work for her, and delivers a revamped fairy tale that I definitely recommend a reread. Better yet, it's the first of a series of revamped tales all set in the same world, featuring well-known tales like Snow White, Rapunzel, and Little Red Riding Hood. There were some tantalising hints sprinkled throughout the book about what's in store for the next few books, and I can't wait to read them. Okay, so why do I want to talk about these two books together? They're only similar on a very superficial level, right? Both feature a girl who's not quite human. Both are set in oriental locations. And that's about where it ends. But I want to talk to you about what these books do right and what they don't, and compare them to each other. Both of these books have a very definite setting. Unlike stories set in Somewheresville Cityopolis, The Windup Girl is very definitely set in Thailand, and Cinder is very definitely set in New Beijing. But the way they go about that is very different and demonstrates that old adage of show don't tell. Cinder is very much a tell kind of story. We're told that she's in New Beijing, but we aren't really shown what that means. In fact, Beijing and Chinese culture are almost entirely absent from Cinder. There's a few bits and pieces like honorifics attached to names and the characters eat dumplings, but that's about it. We're never shown what living in New Beijing means, and consequently it could be set pretty much anywhere. The Windup Girl, on the other hand, is set in Thailand, and there's no way it could possibly be set anywhere else. From the interjection of Thai into the dialogue, to the cultural concerns the characters have with honour and saving face. Not to mention the way that each of the characters has their own distinct cultural background, and that affects the way they interact with each other and the world around them. Now, partially this fascination with Asian cultures and the prevalence of them in the Windup Girl may be because Bacigalupi majored in East Asian studies. But you can't deny the way that the different cultures are intrinsically linked to the narrative. Because of the world the Windup Girl is set in, it shows the worst, most self-serving sides of all of the characters. But it's their worst side, as informed by their individual cultures.
A fascinating cultural development.
On the flip side of that, however, it's the fact that because all of the characters are nasty, self-serving human beings, there is no real sympathetic character we can cheer for. No, I lie. I was cheering for Emiko, but she's actually in surprisingly little of the story. Everyone else, however, is a horrible person out to screw over everyone else in order to get to the top. And while it's probably a realistic look at what would happen in a desperate and dark future, where everyone has to fight tooth and nail simply to survive, it doesn't really lend to me cheering for any of them or wanting them to succeed. And it definitely doesn't help me to emotionally invest in any of them. So, instead of a gripping story about the cast of characters trying to survive against the odds in a broken world, it turns into the kind of cool interest you might show reading an unbiased news report. Yes, it's interesting enough that you'll stick around to find out what happens next, but your emotions aren't engaged. If one of the characters die, you're not going to be torn up about it. It'll just be another interesting thing that happens. Cinder, on the other hand, has extremely engaging characters. Cinder herself is a spunky mechanic who's acutely aware of her station in life, but nevertheless is brave and selfless and all of those good things. We cheer for her and want her to succeed in her endeavours. When something goes wrong for her, we want her to get better. When Prince Kai smiles at her, we smile back. And this engagement with Cinder extends to everyone else. Prince Kai is dealing with his responsibilities and duties as part of the royal family, and the various side characters all have their own stories, and we care about them. It's good character writing that sucks you into the story much faster and keeps you there much longer than the Windup Girl can ever hope to. So what I'm trying to say, I think, is that if you combine these two books, the Windup Girl with its fascinating setting and richly dark storyline, and Cinder with its engaging and sympathetic characters, you'd have the perfect book. Or the blandest book in the world, if you went the other way, I guess. But since combining the two is not possible, you'll have to be content with two books which are good, but for different reasons. The Windup Girl is deliciously complex with details and ideas that will have you puzzling out the realities of the world long after you put the book down, while Cinder will have you laughing and crying as you cheer for the characters to get their well-deserved happily ever after. Ultimately though, it's Cinder that I would reach for again if I ever had to choose between them. It may be a simple fairy tale with cyborgs and aliens, but the humanity of the characters makes it a more enjoyable overall read.